Hi. So, anyone coming to my channel will have noticed that my content has been heavily focused on my realization and self diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. I was a young girl in the 90s and early 2000s when the autistic experience was defined by one end of the spectrum as seen in young boys with particular unconcealable traits. Other neurodivergences have been equally misunderstood over time. I remember throughout my school life the running narrative in media that all kids are suddenly developing ADHD, when really scientific understanding was just developing. Getting better at understanding that hyperactive kids maybe weren't just undisciplined, as previous generations believed. And currently, I'm sure it feels like that's what's going on right now with the amount of people finding newer, updated content about ASD and self diagnosing. I am part of that wave. It makes sense that it is a wave because once new neurodivergent lore drops, that opens a door to everyone who had previously applied but had gone overlooked due to a lack of understanding. We didn't suddenly manifest. We've always been here with these experiences and traits. They just weren't categorized as such. And I completely understand the skepticism of those outside of the sphere of influence that's sharing this revelatory content as it's mounting. I'm sure it feels sudden and unbelievable. How could that many people have gone undiagnosed? Just the idea that someone can live their whole life and die and not know they were autistic and have been doing so since whatever stage of human evolution produced the first autistic person seems unreal, especially because the given understanding of what autism looks like for the longest time was something that made sense. There is a comfort in thinking that you can pinpoint the nuances among humans, and the realization that we cannot feels to some people like a lie or betrayal. It's a very complicated set of emotions, and I was on the other side up until this recent point in my life. The fact that I thought I knew what autism was the very thing that kept me isolated and dismissed. My lived experience wasn't part of the conversation, and the only explanation I had for my struggles was that I'm a failure, I need to try harder to be normal, and because of that, I was far too ashamed to openly admit I was in any way different. That's where the masking comes in, of which I'd like to think I'm pretty good at, or have been. So that is how it happens. That is how I was overlooked and went undiagnosed, and have now self diagnosed at 30. The experience of becoming self diagnosed was not sudden for me. I don't really know the proper way of saying that, if self diagnosing is a verb, but also a state of being, a process, and a label. Sorry, please forgive my language use in this one. But anyway, when it came to relating to neurodivergent content previously, I'd always been on the well meaning but inaccurate side of chalking it up to, oh, we've all just got a little sprinkle of the tism. Which it is perfectly understandable to find aspects of certain neurodivergent traits relatable, because we're all just people, but that also acts as a means for others to disregard the expanse or severity of the neurodivergent experience. In some cases, it dangerously simplifies them, like when people will joke and equate liking things tidy as them being a little OCD, when the actuality of extreme OCD can derail one's ability to function and is not cute or desirable. The fact that I would brush my relation to autistic content off as being just that, as just relatable, ended up blanketing over the fact that I saw myself in the things that were singularly autistic. There is relatability across the human experience, and there are overlaps between autistic people and allistic people because it's a spectrum and we're not all the same. But there are some things that allistic people do not experience the same way because of that difference in the neurotype, and I was actively passing those things over, disregarding them as coincidence, rather than a red flag. I categorized and understood myself as just an extreme introvert, and there was nothing I wanted to pursue to change that. As I'll explore in depth in another video, though, there is an important differentiation between being an introvert and being introverted because of the autistic experience. And of course, given the knowledge at the time, I couldn't have known that the reasoning behind my actions and the experience I feel when socializing could mean anything otherwise. When I was 16, which would make it like roughly 2010, I self diagnosed myself with social anxiety disorder because that was the best, closest explanation I had to my lived experience that I could find on the internet. I printed off some jot notes with the definitions, riddled it with highlights, brought it to my mother, and with shaking hands and unstoppable tears, explained to her what social anxiety was, that I had it, and it was bad, and that I didn't want to pursue treatment because I was managing. But mostly, I felt like it was so much a part of myself that it couldn't be fixed. I would live with it and just continue to try as hard as I could to make sure that it didn't affect me enough to need any help or intervention. I'd already made it 16 years, surely. I was on top of it. Enter the gong show that was my young adulthood. I ended up in some awful environments, no matter who you are. I got pushed to the brink, which now, in hindsight, was autistic burnout. And when I could no longer cope or compensate, after all of the innumerable ways that I was taken advantage of because I was so unable to advocate for myself, my life fell apart. And I did pick up all the pieces. All that happened in my early 20s, but it made for a pretty damnable track record, which I can now look back upon and go, wow, yeah, how did I not know that I was autistic? How did everybody else not? Well, I know how. From my mid 20s to the big 30, I obsessively pursued answers. I have always overanalyzed myself and my life experiences, and in the wake of my disastrous first relationship, I finally started writing it down. It took 4 memoirs for me to process the trauma of what I went through in that codependency and my responses to the environment that it created. Surprise, surprise, one of my special interests is self-narrative, the dissection of human behavior and the pursuit of understanding human experience so I can feel safe. I didn't know that at the time, obviously. I didn't know that could be a pretty autistic red flag to be so engrossed with rumination. And I find it highly ironic now how much I see my autism shaping my ability to understand the world in what and how I wrote about my experiences. I hope to re-examine them later on, too, when I'm able. But suffice to say, I've always actively participated in the pursuit of understanding my narrative, so when, in my 30s, I was finally introduced to content about autism and high-functioning girls before the 2010s, I was well equipped. That said, my immediate response was that of denial, because of my fixation with having a narrative of myself that I could understand, and the pursuit of making all the things that I could fit into an holistic lens. I, once again, desperately wanted to chalk it up to coincidence. The first piece of media I consumed that made me genuinely question my reality was Cynthia Dubois' video called My Late Autism Diagnosis. The algorithm offered the video to me because I watch a lot of her main channel's videos as Lady of the Library, and I didn't even realize that this wasn't on that channel. I saw her and I clicked it, not because of my curiosity in autism, but because I cared to hear about this person whom I respect's experience, and assuming she might announce her content shifting or a hiatus, and I wanted to show my support. As I listened to her, though, her story was relatable in a way that did not feel coincidental. She described a lived experience that was a little too similar to mine, in how she related to people and how she put expectations on herself that didn't actually fit, how that burnt her out, and ultimately, when she got her diagnosis, the strange sense of grief that she felt. And the veil between her experience and mine, or rather, the bubble that I'd constructed of my own narrative, felt very thin. I understood. I genuinely understood how upsetting it would be to realize that you'd been autistic your whole life. And as much as I realize allistic people can be empathetic to that too, obviously, this was different. This was me relating to my own story told through someone else's mouth and getting upset about it. for her, but for me too. What do you mean those traits and experiences and processes make you autistic? That would make me autistic. That would overwrite my entire existence if what you just described counts. And I have also been living unaware and yet so severely limited because of this. And I mean, I would be so fucking upset too, huh? And for once, it wasn't just a relatable coincidence. I'd heard myself as autistic, and I had to do more research. I started with TED Talks. Not that I think they're indisputably credible, but they're succinct. So once I had the terminology I needed, late diagnosis in life, undiagnosed in women, self diagnosed autism, I was down the rabbit hole. My acceptance was still tempered with denial for months. I was keeping a list during every testimonial as to what fit and what wasn't totally applicable to my personal experience, but it is a spectrum, and regardless, a heavy majority of all of the new conditionals for autism and overlooked girls, and the understanding of what high functioning and high masking felt like on the inside, not just looked like from the outside, made it very overwhelmingly clear. Objective. I described that lived experience exactly myself already without the bias of hearing other people talk about it beforehand, and I could no longer deny it. I reread some of my older journals and the things that I've written and the ways that I felt, and it was like, oh God. With this new understanding, I suffered a pretty good existential crisis. Yeah, I'm making light of it. That doesn't sound very compelling the way that I said that, but I've been through a couple existential crises already in my life. The dissolution of my high school sweetheart relationship as a codependent nightmare, the juxtaposition of being a grade A student living in a crack shack, the recovery from all of that on top of forcing myself through a failing holistic lens that whole time because I'm actually autistic. And fuck. I was thankfully in a safe space when this realization came upon me. I have people around me who instantly accepted the possibility without judgment, which is a sign in and of itself. But the grief was still immeasurable. A whole new lifetime worth of trauma to contend with when I was still grappling with what I thought I knew. It was so much easier when I thought that everything was my own fault and not an inherent difference in me that the world just didn't compute with. My assumed failure at life had always been the answer or the thing that I could rationalize, and now I'm just autistic. And honestly, accepting myself in a positive way because of that has been the hardest barrier that I've faced so far. I don't want to excuse myself as having done the best that I could have with the resources and knowledge that I had. I am so fundamentally opposed, conditioned at this point, from feeling proud of who I am because I have fallen short for so long. And I'm still not there yet, but it feels so validating to finally have the answer I have been so desperately seeking for 30 years. So if anyone out there is wondering, this is how people go undiagnosed for decades, and this is what it feels like for me to have finally found myself through a self-diagnosis. Being autistic, by the new understanding of it, and including high masking individuals, is my lived experience. And for all I know, there may be another aspect to my brain functions I am unaware of, like mild OCD. But for now, the one thing that I know, after trying to fit a square peg into a round hole my whole life, I have found the square hole, and I fit perfectly. With self-diagnosis coming in a wave on social media right now, I can understand that people would be skeptical. I was also skeptical at first. I gaslit myself into denying the eerily applicable testimonies because it didn't fit what I thought autism was, as taught in the 2000s. And I was convinced that I wasn't autistic if I didn't look like that. And there are certainly people out there who stand to benefit from content infantilizing autism, specifically those with a focus on getting your own cute autistic girlfriend like we're collectibles. Unfortunately, it is a thing, as it has been seen before, that some people will intentionally lie about disabilities and fake them for clout. But if it wasn't clear from my story, and I'm not speaking for everyone who has given themselves or received a light diagnosis, but we don't want to be autistic. I didn't want to be. I just hit a point of coincidence and correlation where I couldn't deny it anymore. The understanding and validation is nice, but it's a consolation prize. I would obviously rather that I didn't struggle with so many things, and I was an extrovert and happy and confident, and everything always made sense because I was self assured and loved myself. But having lived my whole life as an autistic person in a neurotypical designed world and not knowing has led to the exact opposite. I didn't have the understanding or support that I would have needed not to be who I am now, whom I don't particularly like, if that's not obvious. The aspects of myself which I've internalized as flaws rather than acceptable differences due to neurological differences stress me out. I personally don't make the statement of self diagnosed autism lightly. I am an anxious, over analytical person. I have examined and cross examined myself to the point that I just had to give up and accept it. But I respect that there are many people out there who do not consider self diagnosis valid. That if I don't have a formal diagnosis, I should just shut the fuck up. That's fair. That's very fair. But also, I've been watching lots of informative content creators who are autistic themselves, and they all acknowledge the validity of self diagnosis. It is now a legitimate, expected stage of being a late diagnosed autistic. Because why would a formal doctor approved diagnosis be the only valid form of autistic identification when it's only been within the last few years that they even understood ASD enough to include all of the thousands of people who now count and who are now self diagnosed? The system has failed us once already by missing us. The informative autistic content creators that I watch emphasize inclusion because they know that it is about the lived experience which no one else can see or feel for you to validate that determines your neurodivergence, unless you are on the noticeable, more extreme end of the spectrum. And if you've already gone decades unnoticed, obviously that's not you. You've passed. Congratulations. Woo. What a lot of skeptics don't understand is that formally diagnosed autistic content creators expressly value the validation of fellow self diagnosed autistics. When you are part of a disadvantaged minority, it is more important that your fellow members get the recognition. There are people who will misdiagnose themselves, but the benefit of the self diagnosed people who do need help getting what they deserve finally far outweighs a single grifter. It can still seem confusing though, like why some of us are so compelled to talk about it, especially considering I'm on the internet right now and not just talking to my immediate family. Like, if you're only self diagnosed, why don't you just wait to share? And, well, obviously that's a valid criticism. I'm in a self diagnosis dilemma. I would be mortified if I posted all these videos and said all of these things only to find out somehow I'm not autistic, despite all of the compelling evidence. So, realistically, I should just be playing it safe and keeping quiet. And I don't have a counterargument to that, because I agree. My black and white way of thinking is usually so risk averse, and yet here I am. I respect anyone who denies me as valid if they are not also autistic and know how that feels, because you can't possibly rationalize why someone would do something so questionable and vulnerable. Just wait. I should be just waiting. But to me, it feels like I can't wait. It feels like for the first time in my life, I need to get ahead of this to avoid the overwhelm that it may cause, or the identity crisis, or the obsessive binges that I've gone on, desperately trying to pin down and dissect my life, because I don't process this in time. I don't know. I don't want the years I spent writing those memoirs to happen again. As petrified as I am to be perceived, I also feel as though I cannot be known or loved until I am. I've always felt like I need to show people my insides because they don't get enough from my outsides that I can believe that they know me, that I can trust them or feel safe. I wrote an entire autobiography when I was 16 and in a confessing mood with the sole purpose that my romantic interest read it so that I didn't feel like I was lying to him about who I was so that he could be allowed to then date me. It's complicated. This is my outlet. This is my special interest. It always has been. To understand and to lay myself bare. And anyone who understands autism knows if I am truly, I should not stifle myself. It's painful. It's just really inconvenient that this happens to be the form of expression I feel like working this out with. You know, like, trust me, bro, I wish I wasn't like this. But unfortunately, I made this video to tell my story with self-diagnosis and introduce all of the coming content that I'll be posting with realizations, processing how autism has affected me throughout my life, and my seeking of a formal diagnosis. I will be directing all self-diagnosed haters to this video who do not like that I am speaking on a topic of which I am not formally diagnosed with, in hopes of bridging a gap in understanding what my experience has been and why I now use this label. It could be years until I get a diagnosis, despite my best efforts, and I can't just stop being who I am and doing what I feel compelled to do during that gap. It's not just a trend for me, it's my life, and I've always needed to share that because the masking makes me afraid that I'm being disingenuous and eternally misunderstood. This outlet is necessary even if nobody watches it. I need to know that I exist somewhere where I show my whole self. I made this banner for my channel considering the hard pivot my content is going to take, and I want to be as transparent as I can be. I hope that it's clear in my videos that I don't speak from a place of authority, but through my own opinions and experiences and research. I will always admit that I am self-diagnosed, no matter how strongly I feel I'm autistic, and it is part of who I am, but I do hope that someday I will be able to take that little extra tag off. Thank you for watching and hearing my story. If you want to join me on this journey, stick around, like, subscribe. If you've had similar life experiences, I'd love to hear them. Honesty is my top priority, and I think communication benefits us all. Yeah.